and oh, there's the recording sound. Started in 1997 at Cambridge University, where I was doing a postdoc. And so I was there for a long time. Then I moved back to Australia in 2015. So I'm now at the University of Sydney. So I don't know how much more to start with, Kris, or do you want more? Or
no, that's great. Unless you want to, yeah, no, thank you.
okay.
So Sam, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Sure. So did you want me to introduce, and then are we going to talk about, because I was going to talk about book publishing, so shall I do that after the introduction?
Yeah, we can, yeah, we can just do a brief introduction and then go back.
Cool. Okay, great. So hi, I'm Sam Hurn. And I guess those of you who are in the introduction know who I am, because I waffled at you for ages, but I'm Associate Professor in Anthropology, and I direct the Anthrozoology Masters and PhD programs at the University of Exeter. I'm also the director of the Exeter Anthrozoology as Symbiotic Ethics Working Group, also at Exeter. But in addition to that, I'm series editor for the Routledge Multi-Species Encounters book series. So I'll be talking to you in a bit about book publishing in particular. Okay, thanks.
And Kate, do you want to introduce yourself next?
Sure. So I'm Kate Marks. I did the Anthrozoology PhD at Exeter between 2015 and 2018. And then after I finished the PhD, I stayed on for a year as a postdoc doing the Perceptions of Rhino Poaching project funded by National Geographic. And then once that came to an end, I went to my current job, which is I'm the social research manager at an environmental NGO here in the UK.
Thank you. And Linda?
Yes, I'm Linda Cornbocus. I'm a bit of a newbie to all this kind of stuff, but I graduated with a Master's in Anthrozoology from Exeter in 2019. I have a couple of papers published and one in the pipeline, but I'm a bit of a rookie researcher compared to all these guys. So I'm kind of freshest to the fold, if you like.
Yeah, thank you. Sam, did you want to talk about book publishing a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So I thought it might be useful if I just share my screen to be able to talk to you a little bit about the series that I edit as a kind of a lens through which to consider book publishing more generally, because most academic book publishers work according to reasonably similar criteria and processes and so on. So if you, oops, just bear with me a sec and I shall just. So can everybody see my screen now? Yeah, okay, super. So yeah, as I said, the series that I edit is with Routledge, which is one of the kind of fairly well-established academic publishers. And I co-edit with a geographer called Kris Wilbert, because we wanted to make sure that it was a kind of multidisciplinary endeavor. We also have a whole host of external reviewers and other kind of associate editors who we can call on if we need people to input on particular kind of disciplinary concerns and so on. So most academic research tends to get published, if it's going to be published in book form, in an academic book series. There are obviously some that are able to cross over into kind of popular publishing and a wider readership. So for example, John Bradshaw's The Animals Among Us that I cited in my introduction being a classic example, or Hal Herzog's Some We Love, Some We Hate, Some We Eat. But for most of us as academics, we'll be publishing in either academic journals or academic presses. So I'll talk a little bit about the my role as series editor, because if you're wanting to publish an academic book, then the series editor will be your kind of first point of contact in most cases. And obviously there are many other academic publishers out there. I'm just using Routledge as the example because it's the one I know best. But I'd certainly advise any of you, if you're wanting to publish either an academic monograph, a single authored book, or an edited volume, and I'll talk through the pros and cons of each of those options in a bit, but to really do some kind of due diligence and look around at all the different options available. You might find that there's a certain academic publisher who is more prolific at publishing the sorts of books that you read more often, or where you feel that your research would sit more comfortably. So my role as series editor is I kind of have to either commission books, or people come to me with a book proposal, and then I support that and put it forward to the editorial board at Routledge, who then make a decision on whether or not a contract can be issued. So, for example, if with my PhD students, if when they've come to the end of the process, if their material is something that I think Routledge would be interested in publishing, then I will suggest to them that they should consider submitting a proposal. Likewise, if I encounter colleagues at conferences and so on, then I can likewise kind of make them aware of the series, but more often than not, people will come to me with a proposal for a book that they'd like to publish. So when, as I say, when you're thinking about this process, finding the right person to send your proposal to is really important. So within Routledge, there are many series editors. There are also, interestingly, many kind of anthrozoological series that Routledge produce. So not just my multi-species encounters, but Henry Buller, who's another colleague at Exeter, also has a kind of a multi-species series. So yeah, there's a huge market out there, but all academic publishers will have information for prospective authors on how you should go about preparing a proposal for the publisher to consider. So once you've established which publisher is the best fit for the content, or for your style of writing, or for the particular audience that you want to reach, then you need to go through certain steps in order to enable them to consider your proposal. So here on the Routledge site, you can just see that they have a proposal form that you have to submit. And then they also go through all of the different information, all the different processes. So I'm just trying to find their site's changed since I last looked at it, and they usually have a link to the form that you need to fill out. But it requires you to do quite a significant amount of preparation to convince the publisher that your book is right for them, but particularly to demonstrate that there's a market for the book, because academic publishing is a really expensive process. Academic books retail for quite high amounts. So they want to make sure that you've considered who your market is, and that you can persuade them that there's a sufficiently vibrant market that will be interested in purchasing your book. So often that will be academic libraries, and I think that's how they justify the high cost of some of these academic books. But also, books will be much more likely to be taken on by a publisher like Routledge if you can also demonstrate that it has wider appeal, not just to kind of academic staff, but also to undergraduate and postgraduate readerships in different disciplinary areas, and ideally having some wider appeal to particular members of the public, be they kind of particular niche interest groups or more generally. So just, I guess I don't want to tread on Anthony's toes, but I wanted to just briefly mention that some of the pros and cons of why you might consider publishing a book versus why you might consider publishing your doctoral research or your master's research as an article or a series of articles in peer-reviewed journals. So Academic monographs or edited volumes also go through a really rigorous peer review process, as do articles. So in that sense, the process is the same, but books can often take a much longer period of time to be able to reach the market. So if you've written something that's really timely, then it sometimes makes more sense to publish as a series of articles, because then you might also reach a much wider readership, particularly if you publish across different kind of disciplinary fields. Yeah, so there are also different types of books, as I mentioned earlier. So Routledge, again, because I know them, they in addition to publishing academic monographs, which are single authored books, which are typically what result from a PhD thesis in the social sciences. They also publish edited volumes where, and it's usually the editor who will submit a proposal for an edited volume to a series editor. And ideally, if you want to submit an edited volume, then you can submit a proposal for the book, and then once you have been issued with a contract, approach people or try and recruit participating authors who will write the different chapters that you've identified would be relevant, or that you then decide through a kind of process of elimination are the best fit for your edited volume. But certainly in my experience with the Routledge series, if you want to submit an edited volume, then having your contributors lined up is the best course of action. Another consideration is that certainly Routledge has a policy that they won't publish books from anyone who doesn't have a PhD. Other academic publishers might be more lenient, and obviously when it comes to publishing articles, a high number of academic journals will publish student research, but certainly for some of the academic book publishers, that isn't the case. They will sometimes make exceptions. So for example, my edited book in this series had contributions from, I think at the time, 2 of my PhD students while they were undertaking their PhD. So they were still PhD candidates. And but because the other contributors to the volume were what they term senior academics, so people kind of senior lecturer or above, then they were willing to include that kind of diversity of expertise, if you like. So there is a kind of, I guess, academic snobbery involved in book publishing, which is unfortunate, but seems to be the case. But if you aren't a PhD student and you'd like to be included in an edited volume, or you have an amazing idea for an edited volume, then there are ways you can get around that by either collaborating with an established academic who would perhaps take the role of lead editor with you as a co-editor, or to be a contributor of a chapter to an edited volume edited by someone else who's more senior and with a kind of a range of expertise being showcased in that volume. Routledge and other academic publishers do have a couple of other options that might be more of interest and where there is greater flexibility in terms of the eligibility criteria. So Routledge publish what they call a kind of policy orientated short form kind of books, which are often a good possibility for either students or for non-academic professionals working in organizations or in fields where there is crossover or kind of interest for academic audiences. So yeah, so that's I think, I'm conscious I'm kind of rushing through stuff, but I'm happy to answer any specific questions that you might have. But I think the most important thing to emphasize is that it's a very long and drawn out process. Academic publishers have particular markets or particular readerships. And so making sure that when you're doing your research to put together your proposal, that you end up submitting your proposal to the most suitable publisher, and then you're more likely to have the proposal accepted. So yeah, as I say, I edit this series with Routledge, but there are many other very good academic book publishers out there. And yeah, I guess I'm always happy to provide advice. Often proposals will get submitted to me for the series that aren't quite the right fit, and then I'll suggest that they approach Brill or other academic publishers where where there might be a better fit. Okay, so that's probably enough from me. I'll mute and hand over to Anthony.
Right, thanks.
Stop sharing.
Am I ready? Oh, we got a screen.
Yeah,
okay. Okay. Yeah. So I'll just tell people a little bit about Anthrozoös. Actually, it's also owned, well, not owned, but it is published by Routledge. So they're getting a lot of free press tonight, but there are other publishers. So yes. So as I say, we've been publishing the journals, had a long history. It's been going since 1987. And in those days, it was owned by Delta Society in the United States. And eventually later, by about 2000, they sold the journal to the International Society for Anthrozoology. And they actually own the journal. And since then, we've had different publishers. We've had Purdue University Press. Then we moved on to Berg Publishers, who were taken over by Bloomsbury. And now we're published by Taylor and Francis, Routledge. So yeah, things have changed a lot in the publishing arena for this field in particular, which has grown exponentially since I became involved in 1992, which makes me seem very, very old, and I am, I guess. But anyway, it's it's a fast-moving environment. So for people who, what else can I tell you about the journal? Oh, yes. Okay. So basically, we have a peer review system for all submitted papers. It's a blind peer review. So the reviewers don't know the papers or the authors of the papers that they're reviewing, and the authors don't get to know who reviewed their paper. That being said, sometimes because it is still a relatively small field, some people try to guess who they're reviewing, and maybe they can work it out. But I never tell them if they're correct or not. If they want to guess, they can guess. But so anyway, all papers go through that process where they have two independent reviewers. It may lead to, and I must admit, the first thing I want to say about the review process is that it's an imperfect beast. We use it as a way of trying to monitor the quality of papers, but reviewers are different. People have different ideas even about what is good quality research, and it depends on how they do the review. What are they measuring? What standard are they hoping to achieve? What are they comparing what they're reviewing with how they write or how they perform? It really is, quite it is problematic in the sense that you just can't guarantee what you're going to get in terms of, you'd love everyone to just give objective reviews and that every reviewer had the same standard, that the field was measured by the same standard, but that actually doesn't happen. Not exactly. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But so for instance, I can get a review where someone will say, accept the paper, it's great. And the other reviewer will say, reject. And in fact, I had that happen today. And that then leads to that problem where you have to either adjudicate and work it out yourself. That is, I would have to work out what to do. Usually I go to a third reviewer in that case, a third independent reviewer, to see where the balance lies. Where is it going to tip to accept or reject? Now, what I'd like to point out to everyone who's new to publishing, as well as, you will, unfortunately, everyone goes through a rejected paper. And I've been through many. When I was a young researcher as a PhD student, it hurts, for sure, it hurts. But hopefully you'll get constructive reviews that can help you to, just write better papers. It's a learning process. So don't be put off by the rejection. If you get it, put it away for a day or two, and then go back to it and read the reviews again. Or if you have your supervisor with you, hopefully you can talk it through. it's never as bad necessarily as it seems the first time you read it, because it's always awful to get a rejection. So just bear that in mind. And there are ways to move forward. If you're not going to move forward with that journal, you know, there are many other journals now that publish on human-animal interaction. So that's a good thing. That's, again, shows that the field is developing. It's not just down to Anthrozoös, for instance, which was, yeah, for a while, really the only journal out there that you could submit to. So there are quite a few now, like Society in Animals, Humanimalia, even, and then, Animals, the journal Animals sometimes publishes that type of work. Human-Animal Interaction Bulletin from the American Psychological Association. So yeah, there are a number of alternatives that you can look toward. But yeah, just don't give up if you get a reject letter. Okay, it's not an easy process either from my side, having to field the reviewers, as I say, who can be maybe inconsistent, or they may have a bias against certain types of research, or people will, you know, we try to avoid problems like that. And I've worked in the field so long, I do know, you know, many of the people who work in the field. So sometimes you can judge where there may be a problem. You wouldn't send a paper to a particular reviewer because you know they're maybe more likely to reject it because they just don't like a lot of the research that's going on. So you do have to, that is a job that I have as an editor. I have to work out what's the best way of getting papers assessed. And I acknowledge and always remember that I was a student and that I was a young writer, and that you're never beyond being, you know, having your stuff rejected. But that's part of it. And I say, really, you know, you will learn a lot from it. So I've looked back at papers I had rejected, and I can see now, years later, that, yeah, probably the reviewers were right, or I had fair reviews, or whatever. So you learn along the way. It's just you know, that's part of it. And when you get accepted, of course, it's a great high. So you can't stop smiling once that happens. So, you know, just give it, take, you know, take what comes and hopefully learn from that. So I'm not sure what else I can say about the journal, because it's basically, once we get through that peer review process, we've just moved to a new system so that for publishing, once a paper is accepted, we should be able to get it up online, at least within a few weeks. And whereas we still print a hard copy of the journal, so that will still come out at a slower pace because we print 6 copies of the journal each year. They'll still come out as printed versions according to their time, whereas the online version of your paper will come out within a few weeks and could be, you know, online only for quite a while until that print version comes out. So, you know, there is a lot of demand, of course. I'm sure you know that you want to get papers published, you want your work published. So there's a lot of pressure on the publishers. There's a lot of pressure on the editorial team as well to try to do reviews as quickly as possible. Just bear in mind that some journals like Anthrozoös are quite small. We don't actually have a big budget to run an editorial team. In fact, while I'm paid as an editor, everyone else who, you know, does the reviewing, for instance, they're not paid, of course. They're volunteers. Reviewers do it out of the goodness of their hearts. So yeah, just bear in mind that some journals can't keep up with some of the biggest journals that can have a high, you know, very quick turnover because they have a big editorial team behind them. So yeah, I'm not sure what else to say right at the minute. People might have more questions really about the editorial process. Anyway, I hope that helps just to get things started.
Yeah, thank you, Anthony. And there's already some questions, but I'm going to move on to Kate, and then Linda have a few things to share. And I saw there was a question already from Nina about if you can publish your MA before you have a PhD. And I think that Kate and Linda will answer that when they tell us a little bit about their experiences. So Kate, if you want to go next.
Sure. So I'll just, I guess, say a little bit about my overall experiences publishing from starting out to now. So I didn't publish anything while I was doing the master's. To be honest, it didn't even occur to me at the time. And then shortly after I started the PhD, an email popped into my inbox and someone had put their email signature as publish or die, which was a little bit alarming because until then I didn't really think of it as a big deal. So I started looking for kind of calls for papers for student journals and things like that, because I thought that would be a nice way to kind of ease into it. So the first thing I did was I published a piece of work that I'd done during my master's for a student journal. And then that went pretty smoothly. All the feedback was really nice and friendly. And then after that, I published another piece of work that I'd done during my master's for Humanimalia online. And then I was in the thick of my PhD at the time, and I had a chapter that I thought would make a good journal article. So I submitted that to Society and Animals. That took a really long time to go through the review process. I think it was about 9 months or something before I actually heard back from them, because obviously they were, and still are, extremely busy. So I heard back and they had a lot of revisions. They wanted a lot of stuff changed, but ultimately they were interested in publishing it. We went through the whole process back and forth a couple of times. Right before it was kind of ready to be published, I found a really bad mistake that I'd managed to leave in there and not notice. And I had to kind of get back to them really apologetically and say, I'm really sorry. And we essentially started the review process all over again. So from submitting to getting that published, I'd say that was probably about 18 months. So yeah, it took a long time. And then I also submitted and got 2 articles published in Anthrozoös, so Anthony's journal. That was weird because those 2 articles were published in the same issue, which I wasn't expecting, but that was obviously great. I mean, since then, I've had all kinds of experiences. I've had times when I've submitted articles that I got really great feedback on, and it made me feel really sparkly and warm and fuzzy inside. And I've also had the really brutal, like savage feedback. Actually, it was after I'd published the Society and Animals and Anthrozoös, I was probably feeling a little bit like bulletproof and sort of proud of myself. And I got completely savaged for something I'd submitted to a different journal and brought back down to earth with a bang. But I just kind of think, in a way, the really bad feedback, because you hear about it and everybody gets it at some stage in their career, it's almost like being part of a club, of like the club that you join when you've had really terrible, brutal feedback that you have to share with everyone you know and go, oh my God, look at what they just sent me. And then you do a little bit of ego repair and you just get up and carry on, I guess. And then as soon as when I was getting quite close to the end of the PhD, Sam told me about the multi-species encounters series that she was talking about, and suggested that maybe I try putting in a proposal for my thesis to be published as a monograph as part of that series. So I did that. I contacted them. I filled in, as Sam said, quite a long and complicated proposal. It included stuff like, as Sam said, justifying who's going to read it. So I had to go around and do loads of research in terms of like what other university courses might offer it as part of their course, might put it on their reading list. And I had to kind of list all of them kind of in all different countries that might be interested in including it. So I really had to do that kind of work of justifying an audience for publishing. And I think that was complicated. That was tricky, but I managed to get through that bit. And and then I went through the process of publishing with them. Again, that took quite a long time, considering I think I put in the application shortly after I finished the PhD in 2018. And the book was published this January. So that was a long time. It was partly my fault because I was working on other things at the time and I wasn't always getting back to them really promptly with the kind of editorial stuff. But it went back and forth. After it got accepted, the first thing I needed to do was reformat it a little bit to be more appropriate as a book rather than a PhD thesis. One of the things was I ended up taking out a lot of the personal stuff. So I'd written quite, especially at the beginning of the thesis, I'd written quite a lot of kind of personal stuff about my reasons for doing the research. And I didn't really want to put that in the final book. So I took those bits out. I also took out a couple of the chapters just because it was way too long. They wanted 80,000 words and I had over 100,000 words. So I had to sort of brutally cut a couple of chapters out of there. A couple of the chapters had already been published in a different sort of format in journal articles. So I had to go away and get permission. I got permission from Taylor and Francis for the Anthrozoös references. And I got permission from Society and Animals to republish that article in a different format as one of the chapters as well. So I had to go through those kind of permissions processes. And then I went back and forth with the editors at Routledge a couple of times on kind of editorial suggestions that they had. There was a lot of cleaning up as well, making sure that references were correct and things like that. I had to get permission as well. So the work that I had done was based on a blogging site about long distance hiking. I had to get permission from the owners of the blogging site who essentially had the copyright for everything that was posted on there. So I had to get permission from them as well to publish all of their excerpts and things. And without that permission, I definitely wouldn't have been able to publish the book. So yeah, overall it took quite a long time, but it got published in this January. And since then, I haven't been working in academia. I've been working outside in an environmental NGO. So what I'm publishing now, I'm doing a lot of reports for people like DEFRA and the Environment Agency. And I still think, even if you're not planning on pursuing an academic career, it's super helpful to have the academic publishing behind you, because when I've been pitching for those research contracts with those governmental and some non-governmental bodies, having that publishing has been incredibly helpful in getting those contracts as well. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Sorry, I wasn't unmuted. Do you want to just jump in, Linda?
Absolutely, sure. I'm just seeing some of these questions coming in the chat, and a lot of them I was going to be talking about anyway. So I neglected to mention earlier in my introduction to myself, which I'm not particularly great with, that I've also recently been appointed editor-in-chief, I think is the title, of the new student journal for vegan sociology. So I'm now seeing things from the other side of the fence, so to speak. I want to take this opportunity to reassure everyone that's either outside academia altogether or in between, as I am. I'm an independent scholar at the moment, officially. I'm not started a PhD yet, though I hope to in the summertime. It's not, I think the most difficult part about being out with academia, and I've just published a paper about it, is the fact that you lose access to a lot of papers that you might rely on in order to make appropriate references. So that's been quite a tricky experience. It also is the case that when you're not affiliated with an institution, and a lot of people have asked about that it can be difficult to, even in an open access journal, so that's one that's freely available to anyone to read and download, but it's not always free for the author. There are often processing fees associated with that. So that's something to think about, that perhaps a university or an organisation would meet that cost. However, there are a variety of open access journals which are open, truly open in all senses, in terms of them being free for everyone. I think knowledge should be free anyway, but that's the sociologist in me. So when I was doing the masters with Sam and Jess and everyone, was the animal mirror module, an essay, a photo essay I did for that actually Jess had got back to me, and I got a good grade with it, and she said, you know, this is potentially publishable with a bit of extra work. And I thought, you know what, I would really like to do that. I've always loved writing. I just haven't ever published anything. I just write and scribble and whatever, and journal and all that. So the other kind of journaling, not this kind of journaling. So I just bit the bullet, so to speak. Not at the time I finished the master's first, but then I just chucked the paper as it was to the Journal for Critical Animal Studies, which is my area of interest. I'm definitely a lot more about what's the right word? I'm not really sure. Anarchist in nature, maybe. So I sent the article as it was, expecting probably a rejection, but actually I got a potential acceptance with some revisions. So I was actually really surprised, pleased. It took longer to revise it than it did to write it in the first place, I have to be honest. But I did so. And the other thing that I hadn't realized, people are talking about permissions. Because it was a photo article, I decided to keep it that way. But I hadn't thought about getting permissions for all the photographs. So the brilliant photo that I had on the front of the essay when I submitted it to uni, I wasn't able to get in touch with the copyright holder of that photograph at all. So thankfully for me, someone that I know was willing to recreate it. There's probably some copyright issues involved in that. But in any case, I was able to use an alternative. So it's mentioned, I think, in the abstracts that the paper I wrote was about Peppa Pig. She, if you want to call her she, that was tricky because that's about a multinational, global, international, very, very monetized system that I was getting involved in there. They didn't give me permission, nor did Aardman Animations when I wanted to talk about Timmy time and showing the sheep and stuff. But anyway, you find these things out. That's what took me the longest, actually, of all things. It took 6 months to try and get all the permissions for copyright. So if you are thinking of including anything else, you must very early on, even if you don't have an acceptance yet, get those copyright permissions. That would be one thing to say. Since then, I wasn't affiliated to anybody at that point either, so it was published as independent scholarship, although I did have to give a nod to Exeter, of course, for plugging that. So if a professor, lecturer comes back to you and says, this has got potential, then do take that seriously, because these guys know what they're talking about, right? That gave me the impetus to have a look at another piece that I had done for, I think it was the animal criminology module, that had also come back with some feedback saying this is potentially publishable with a little bit of adjustment. So that's currently sitting in review. What I found more than anything, I think, as an independent, non-affiliated person, I think it gives you some freedoms, but some restrictions in other senses. So as I said, you don't have access to things that you might want to reference. However, you do have the freedom to say whatever it is that you're thinking, which an association or a university may not always be so happy with. So I've never published as an academic, as a student, although another paper, what I was doing a lot of the time, and this depends on how chaotic your life is, I suppose, I was just answering bunches of calls for papers. So I joined all these different lists and things on Facebook and groups and whatever, and there's call for papers about something. Now, one of those I went, oh, that's a good idea. I wrote an abstract and that's all I had. And I sent it in and it was accepted. And then I had to write the paper. So thankfully I had a couple of months notice, so I was able to do that. And that was a student journal to do with media and culture. MEXA, Networking Knowledge, is the name of the journal. I'll put some links up on the chat in a little while. But a lot of these smaller journals, as Anthony was talking about there, these are run by volunteers a lot of the time. And the Journal of Vegan Sociology, which we're all sitting now. There's 11 of us in the student editorial team. I kind of feel a bit funny because I'm not actually a student right now, so I'm not sure I should be at the helm of that. But anyway, I am. There's a whole bunch of us learning about peer review. There's some peer review webinar training on Monday for anyone who's interested through the International Association for Vegan Sociologists. Again, free to sign up. Because the peer review process is one that I don't know anything about other than it's happened to me. I've not been involved with it. So it's really important to appreciate, as a few people have said, you've got a lot of different people looking at your work with very different perspectives. So thankfully for me, it's other sociologists, but with a multidisciplinary nature of anthrozoology, you could have someone. I remember I wrote something, and I'll finish up soon, sorry. I wrote something about children just knowing about something, and it was a philosophy lecture, and they said, well, what do you mean by knowledge? I'm like, well, I never even thought of that. So these are the things that are good to think about. But don't let the fact that you don't have a PhD yet stop you. Student journals are amazing. And somebody asked as well about whether or not a PhD programme is more likely to accept you if you're published. I certainly think it helps. And a potential supervisor that I had last year, I didn't go ahead with the application in the end, had said as much. So the more you can get out there and take the advice of the peer reviewers, even the ones that you think are being really mean, there'll be something in there that you can learn from. So I'm not sure how helpful that is, but don't let anything stop you. If you've got a piece of work and you want people to read it and you want people to know how you're thinking, just go for it. Absolutely, no question. And all the best of luck with it too.
Thank you all. Yeah, before we've got a bunch of questions coming in, but I just want to follow on there. So I've got accepted in Anthrozoös 2 papers. One's in print, the other will be coming out this year, based on my MA dissertation. And I want to just say that because unlike Linda, it didn't receive the highest grade. It was a very, it wasn't the best grade. And so I want to just put it out there. I believe the data was good and my grade was fair with my MA, but it wasn't, I didn't really do the data justice. So sort of since graduating, I went back and I reworked it a lot. And yeah, I'm really proud that it's published. But yeah, I just want to put the other side to sort of encourage you. Don't be discouraged if you really enjoyed the research and you perhaps didn't get the high grades you want. Yeah, I'm sorry if I missed any questions and I'm trying to sort of keep track of the chat, but so Sarah had a question. I don't know if you want me to read it out or if you want to say it about, you had a question to ask Sam about book publishing.
Yeah, sorry, I'm just going back to find it now. It's right, I know what's in my head, but okay, I can't find exactly what I wrote, but it says unable to stop video. Oh, okay. Yeah, so what I was interested in is, what about publishing through Kindle? Is it harmful to self-publish your MA dissertation through Kindle? And would it be, what I'm kind of thinking at the same time is basically get it peer reviewed by other anthrozoologists and maybe have other anthrozoologists as editors. But I don't know if it would be considered to be, because it's not an academic publication, it would be, you know, looked at, frowned upon, basically. Thank you.
Sure. I think it really depends what you're hoping to achieve. I think if you're wanting to get your research findings and analysis to a really wide audience, then it's certainly an expedient way of doing that. It would not necessarily be looked on favorably by the ESRC, for example, if you were using it as the basis, you know, to show your credentials for a funding application or for that kind of thing, because it's not, even if you get it independently peer reviewed by other academics, they wouldn't necessarily be reassured that it had gone through what they would see as a kind of a sufficiently rigorous process. But I mean, yeah, lots of people do self-publish, and yeah, it is certainly an option, but I say it very much depends why you're doing it. If you're doing it to get books on your CV to try and get an academic post or academic research funding, then it's probably not the best thing to do. If you're doing it because you want to reach organizations or members of the public who wouldn't necessarily buy academic books, then it's a certainly viable thing to do. I don't know, Anthony, did you have any experience of this?
Well, I mean, I would agree with you in the sense that, yeah, it depends on what you're hoping to achieve and what your target audience is. Anything in the academic world, I think you'd have to leave Kindle away, keep away from Kindle at this point if you want an academic career. But if you're looking for just the fact that you just want to publish and get your stuff out there, and that's your only interest, then Kindle could be the way. I don't have any experience of publishing with Kindle. So yeah, it really depends. Stay academic, then stay with the academic publishers would be my advice.
Thank you. As an addition to that, so it's to get the information out there, basically, and also because I'm being asked for the information, and I understand that the publishing process takes so long, and you know the timescale involved that everybody's talked about in all of the processes. But I'm also wondering if I did that and put it in a Kindle book, would it be then I would not be able to use that work again in any academic publishing after that? It would be refused because it's already been published. Is that correct?
I think it would make it much more difficult to get it published. Like Kate said, when she wanted to include reworkings of material from academic publishers in her monograph, and Routledge accepted that because they were kind of other academic publishers. I think it's easier to go the other way, to have an academic publication and then to kind of rework it for a popular audience, rather than to go popular audience first and then try and rework it academically. I mean, if you've got material you want to get out, there are other options. You can also kind of make it available on a website in a kind of more of a blog type format, rather than presenting it as kind of academic academic research. Yeah.
And if I did that, would that then stop it being published at any point in the future because it's been on a website or a blog or something?
I mean, there are always issues around, as with the assignments you write for the program, and the work that you're producing for the PhD. There are issues around self-plagiarism that you have to consider, and anything that's been published in any format anywhere else then has to be acknowledged when you rework it for publication subsequently. So yeah, I think just if you're being asked for the information, you could potentially produce a report that just summarizes your findings or recommendations that you make available more widely, but then the kind of the meat of the research you submit for more formal publication. I mean, if there's no reason why, if you're talking about your MA dissertation research, there's no reason why you couldn't adapt that for publication in an academic journal. That
Okay. Yeah, I did give them a report, but they want it in a publication format of some sort. So yeah, thank you so much.
So we have a question from Nina here, who would like to know if journals, if there's like so I should just read it out. I would like to know if any journals publish research from some years back, or does it need to be new research? So I guess how new is new? Do you want to answer that, Anthony or Sam? Or
yeah, that is a bit like, yeah, it's a bit hard to tell what is new and what isn't. How far back can you go? Certainly sometimes when we've had papers that are drawing on data that go back, say, 5 or more years, I've had reviewers sometimes say, oh, why is this coming out now? Is that a problem? So it really depends then on how novel and how useful that information is, I guess, because possibly the field moved on in those 5 years when you had not published your work. So I think everything will be discussed as on an individual, case basis. So if we do have that issue come up, we discuss it with the editorial team about how relevant is that paper now. So most likely, if it's very new still and still novel, then that would get through. But if it wasn't, and it was just, if it was not actually adding anything too new to the field, it probably would get more of a negative response. But yeah, every paper would be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, though.
Can I just add as well that it also depends very much on the kind of the discipline. So in anthropology, which is my home discipline, there's a really long tradition of people reflecting back on research that they did like 20 years ago and how it's informed the way that they approach their contemporary research. And one of the books that I'm writing at the moment is kind of spanning the research that I've done over the last 20 years. Yeah, so kind of, yeah, that research having been conducted in the past doesn't preclude it, but as Anthony said, it does very much depend on the novelty of it or the originality of it, and also the kind of the discipline or the field that you're wanting to publish in.
And we have a question here. I'm just going to read it out. What sort of things does work get rejected on? Are the general things, or is it completely dependent on the work and the reviewer? So that's a very, very broad question, I guess. What will get a paper rejected or accepted? Maybe.
Sorry.
What mine has been rejected for, if that's helpful. So I've been rejected because they liked the article in general, but they didn't think that they were the right journal for it. They thought a different journal would be better. So I guess that was just a case of me not doing enough research on where the best fit would be. I've been rejected for not having a strong theoretical underpinning. I guess, again, it's different journals will feel differently about this, but the one that I had submitted to really wanted a really strong theoretical basis for the research for me to be talking about, and I didn't really have that, and I tried to tack something in at the last minute, and weirdly enough that didn't work. So that was rejected. I've been rejected for doing 2 weeks research and thinking I had something really interesting, and I think the reviewer had like several decades of experience on the thing that I had 2 weeks of knowledge on, and even though I thought what I'd found was really interesting, it was just like, you don't know what you're talking about. That was the brutal one, and that was actually completely fair. So yeah, I think those were some of the ones that have been rejected for.
I was just going to say that certainly as a rookie, which I was and continue to be, a lot of the issues are things like just not having enough focus to the paper, perhaps not, when you write a paper for uni, it's slightly different. You've got to have a conclusion that answers the question that you were set, but if you're looking to do something different, you really have to think a bit more broadly, but be a lot more specific in your answer as well. So I see the question just coming in about improving and resubmitting. I would presume that would be the case, but certainly the revisions that I've been sent to think about, and they were very different actually. There was 3 reviewers for JCAS, and they all had very different views on the paper. One of them thought it was great, the other one was a lot more critical, but I took more from that, if I'm honest, and was a bit determined to show them wrong. Kate's very optimistic too, so I think you just have to take it in the same way as you would take the constructive criticism you get from an essay coming back, whatever the grade you get, and use it to develop your writing.
And can I just reiterate the point that's been made earlier, because I think it is so important that everybody does get rejected. I've had numerous, sometimes really harsh, kind of tear-inducing rejections, and it can crush you because you put so much effort in, and particularly if you're writing about something that's really important to you. But as Anthony said, you look back at the reviewers' reports later on when the dust settled, and you can see that actually, yeah, that's the whole purpose of the peer review process. And the same with the kind of the examination process, and having external examiners coming on board for a PhD rather than your supervisors assessing you, because those fresh eyes can look at your project and the research and the way that you've presented it and see things that maybe you and your supervisors haven't seen because you're so close to it. So it is, yeah, even though it can be really hurtful and demoralizing, it's a really important process to go through.
Yeah, definitely peer review strengthened my paper. So, and I just wanted to also mention that people put on the papers on their CV, but you don't see the rejections. So all you see on social media, on people's CVs is their successes. And it can feel very isolating when you get a rejection, and because that's just not visible. But yeah, it's a process. So did you want to?
Oh, did you say something, Kris? What's the sound?
I thought you had your hand up, sorry.
Oh, I did. And then I suddenly lost your sound. Sorry. Oh, I was just going to say, yeah, do, when you're scouting around for a journal, do pay attention as much as you can. Do your research on the journal as well to work out what they publish, what they're interested in, if you know people have published in it. I do get a lot of papers from, there are people in different parts of the world or everywhere who just submit papers because it's so easy online, and they don't actually, they haven't done any research. You'd say, why have they submitted this to Anthrozoös? It's got nothing about human animal interaction. I often get a lot of papers that may just be about a certain animal. I had a paper from a particular country a few weeks ago, which was just about the description of 3 bats that they found in a cave. And this was from some zoologists. Well, I would think, well, why don't you go to a zoology journal? So they hadn't really, I think they were just sending it. You do get, there's a pattern that you notice sometimes where people are just submitting to all sorts of journals. For us, anything that has to do with an animal seems to get sent to us sometimes. So yeah, it'd be really appreciated if people would look at the journals and try and work out whether the journal is a good fit, and they can always contact the editor directly or whoever they know on the editorial board just to check. It just saves time for everyone actually, and you then don't get rejected if you've sent it to the wrong journal. So, you'd like to increase your acceptance rate, and you need to get past the first post because you want your paper to go through the review process and not be held up because it's actually just not right for the journal.
That probably goes a little way to answer in this question, but so are there any starter tips on those of us considering adapting our MA dissertations for academic journals, journal publishing, and are not sure where to begin?
Can I start?
Yeah.
So certainly anyone who's on the Exeter programs, myself or Fenella or Jess or Alex, are always happy to help advise people in that regard, even if it's just kind of making suggestions for potential journals and where you might need to make edits. Because obviously the work that you produce for academic assignments don't necessarily meet the criteria of the journal where the research might end up being published. So but I think as we've all said, thinking who you want to communicate the research to. So if you've done a research project on, I've just used one of the examples that came up in the chat box around kind of zoo policy, then submitting it to a journal that's published by one of the zoological organizations would probably make more sense than submitting it to something like Society and Animals. But also likewise, as we, there's also merit to trying to communicate to a wide audience. And so sometimes it's tempting to submit journal articles to journals, like particularly if you're working in the field of like critical animal studies or kind of animal rights based research, to submit it to journals that are going to be sympathetic to that particular approach. But it can also be really enriching to submit to journals where the readership might not even have considered those issues before. So I think one of the papers that I was most happy about of my own was where I wrote quite a potentially controversial paper that went to a mainstream anthropology journal, and and that's a lot of the responses that I got from that were really surprising because people hadn't thought about things in that way before. Whereas if I'd just submitted it to Anthrozoös or Society and Animals, it would have probably been, yeah, that's nice, move on. So I think, that's all obviously brings with it quite significant risk, because that was one of the papers that I've had to do the most in terms of responding to peer review But again, that was because the reviewers just weren't used to dealing with that kind of material. So yeah, I think there are pros and cons to that strategy, but it's definitely something to keep in mind.
Okay, so Heidi, did you want to ask your question?
Yes, I was wondering, since we're talking about adapting a master's thesis into an article, I was also wondering about the backwards progression of that. If you have not begun your master's thesis, if you could write it in a way that would be adapted well to a journal, does that work backwards as well? Or I haven't written my thesis yet, so I don't really know what the bounds are, but I was curious if anybody has done that, and if so, is it worthwhile endeavor to look at like Anthrozoös, write something for a thesis that could potentially be published to kind of go both things at the same time?
If I could maybe start just by saying about the kind of the university assessment perspective, is that a master's thesis or a PhD thesis have to conform to the requirements of those academic programs, which are often different to the expectations of an academic journal. So particularly for a master's dissertation, I probably would advise against writing it with a journal in mind. For PhDs, again, it depends on the disciplines. So PhDs in bioscience type subjects or primatology or zoology or whatever will be often written as a series of journal articles that will get, rather than a kind of more of a monograph type format. And it's kind of normal in those disciplines to submit bits of the thesis for publication as you go along. Certainly at Exeter and the PhD program that we have here, the requirement is that you can't submit more than 20% of the thesis for publication prior to the thesis being examined. With a master's dissertation, I think, yeah, it would very much depend on the program. You'd need to probably discuss that with your program coordinator or your dissertation supervisor before taking action, would be my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with what Sam says about all of that. I work around a lot of people who work in the sciences. So yeah, it is more common that they could produce just a series of papers and bind it all together with a bit of an introduction and a bit that glues everything together and can submit it as a thesis. But that's probably, yeah, peculiar to the sciences. So a lot of students in those areas are encouraged to publish quickly and along the way, or even to the point where someone has published everything by the time they've even submitted their actual thesis. And then we all say, oh, well, what's the point of the thesis being examined, because they can't reject it now because everything has been reviewed already. So that's one of the safety nets, I guess, in that sense. But it is only really in the sciences that seem to allow that.
Yeah, I guess this is a quick question we have here. So if it got rejected, would you be able to improve that and resubmit to the same journal or another journal? I mean, I can answer. I'm pretty sure you can submit it to another journal, but I'm not sure what the subtleties are with resubmitting a rejected paper.
Okay, so we don't have a way that you could resubmit a rejected paper. So we say, we've decided not to publish this paper or to proceed even with further reviews. So, and, you know, we would suggest maybe some other journals that they could try, but yeah, we don't take, once it's rejected, it's basically, yeah, it's rejected. So we're not offering an opportunity to revise. That's at our journal.
Yeah, I don't know, maybe Linda, do you have any, what about your journal? If somebody had their paper rejected, would you accept a resubmission that was reworked?
We're trying to do things a little bit differently actually at this journal, and including even peer reviews. So although we are peer reviewing separately, and there's going to be at least 2 reviewers for every article, we are sending back collective feedback rather than reviewer 1, reviewer 2, for example. And anyone that there are already a couple of papers that are too short, or they're not really got enough sociological theory, that don't really, we don't think are going to make the cut. But what we're offering then, so this is again where journals are going to be different, but we're trying to start out differently. What we're going to offer is a spot on the blog then to summarize the idea behind the article, and at least it would be published that way, so to speak. So we're not really, unless something was really terrible and didn't even remotely have anything to do with sociology or veganism or animals at all, would we just say, look, this is the wrong place. That said, we had a couple of pieces of artwork and poetry in, so we've suggested Sophie's Zine and some other places that they can put those. So between us, and we've got a great faculty team of advisors as well, between us all, we're managing to encourage, we want it to be encouraging, because we've all had those experiences of rejection or revision that seems, you know, like reviewer 2, the infamous reviewer 2. So that's why we're trying to make it as encouraging as possible, so that no one gives up before they've really started, which is where, especially undergrads, especially, but certainly even postgrads, and even doctoral students are it's an unknown quantity a lot of the time. So we're trying to start as we mean to go on, and just be a little bit, again, I'm back to being anarchic, I suppose, just like a little bit less, try to make the whole process less cumbersome. We're trying to make it a lot more inclusive, and we're trying just, if we can possibly include it in some way, we would rather do that. So it's maybe not the best example, because that's, I think, going to be quite unusual in the world of journals. So but yeah, and the only thing off limits for us is something that isn't sociological. So if it's sociological and it's going to benefit animal and human liberation collectively, ideally, then it's going to be fair game. And the guidance is on the website, although we're still to do the kind of submission guidance. We realised we probably should have had that in advance, but I was appointed quite late on in the process. So yeah, that's another thing to say. Do pay attention to that. There's nothing more infuriating as a lecturer as well. You give people submission guidance for their work, and I'm sure Sam will attest to this. You know, if you want this line spaced and you want these margins and whatever, there's a reason for this stuff, as well as to check you can follow basic instructions. So if you ask for a certain font and certain line spacing, it'll go, just do that. I know it's a pain. And if somebody wants APA referencing and you've done ASA referencing, or you've got footnotes, then just change it for all the time it takes, right? That's so important, because it would be like applying for a job without using the right colour ink on the application form that they've asked you. It's a fundamental basic of the start of the process. So although it's a pain, it's definitely these are the things that can make the difference, because if you couldn't be bothered following the instructions beforehand, you're maybe less likely to follow the suggestions for revision. So that's a wee bit of a heads up for everyone.
Yeah, I don't know.
Oh, sorry.
Carry on, yeah.
Sorry, no, I just butted in. I was just going to add a footnote to that, if I may, that it's always good to try and get your work proofread by someone else, because I had a rejection from quite a big anthropology journal because I'm dyslexic and I wanted to get it in a hurry and I hadn't properly proofread it, and they just rejected it outright because how dare I submit something with all these typos to the Journal of the Royal Anthropological Institute? How dare I? So yeah, so that was a bit of a blow and a frustrating thing, because I knew that I needed to do that, but I just thought, oh, the deadline's now, I've got to get it in. And so forward thinking, planning and proofreading and conforming to the editorial guidelines are all really important.
Can I add something to that as well? Just thought about it. There are definitely cases where, you know, for whatever reason, someone has submitted their paper, but it's not quite ready. And you later work out that for some reason they, and maybe even their supervisor, but I don't know, think that it's the review process that will help tighten the paper and fix it. and that's not acceptable. So you do need to submit what you think is the paper you want, and not that it's half done and, oh, well, we'll let the reviewers do the job. That's too dangerous anyway, because you're quite likely then to be rejected. So yeah, do submit what you think is your perfect paper. Don't leave it straggly, and don't leave bits missing because you think the reviewers will pick out the problems. So anyway, discuss with your supervisor, who should be watching you over that issue.
Can I just throw out one last question? Because I think this will be a good one to end on, and we can think about it too from our perspective as reviewers too. So the question, I was wondering, in today's climate where encouraging mental health is so important, why such harsh, soul-crushing reviews are allowed? And I think we all interpret rejections as harsh and soul-crushing, but some can actually be quite mean. So yeah, if anybody wants to jump in and comment on that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. First of all, I don't think by and large they're trying to hurt your feelings. I mean, maybe a few of them are, but by and large, I think the savage reviews are because your paper probably wasn't in a great state. And you have to remember that a reviewer, or more than one reviewer, has had to sit and spend their time on it. And so if you get a really lengthy review that's listing all the problems with it and all the issues, that person has put a ton of time into making sure they're being really thorough about all the problems with you or with your article. So I just, yeah, I don't know. I would say just have a bit of a sense of humor about yourself, even if not initially. Try to keep it in perspective. It's not meant to be a personal attack most of the time. It's just meant to steer you in the right direction, and you might be in a completely wrong direction with it at the time. And yeah, like people have said, it might sting a bit to start off with, but when you look back, like when I look back on the really brutal one I had, they were completely within their rights to say everything they said. And actually, I'm so glad that someone was there to stop me putting that out into the world when it just wasn't in great shape and wasn't ready. So in hindsight, I appreciate it, even if it felt a bit brutal at the time. But yeah, it's just part of the process as well. Everybody gets those terrible rejections, as we said. And there might be a couple of sadistic people out there who really enjoy hurting people's feelings, but I don't think that's the majority of them.
Could I follow on from that, if it's okay? Just to say that, yeah, I mean, it's part of the process for sure, but I do think the person asked the question, I can't see the question anymore, is probably getting at how it's done rather than what's being done. I think we all expect criticism of our work, whether it's from lecturers or anybody really, readers, you know, you get the reviews of the paper, that's another thing entirely. But I think, yeah, there's a lot to be said for people just being a little bit more thoughtful about where someone might be in their whole academic career when they submit something. I don't know how you can control that. As with everything else, there are differences in personality, as well as with discipline, as well as with all the rest of it, you know, and certain perspectives. So I do think there's a case to be made that people be more mindful of how what they say is taken. But then at the same time, I guess it is about growing a shield of steel like Batfink, and just to be able to cope with it. That reference won't suit everybody, but yeah, I think there's, and that's certainly, again, like with the student journal we're doing, we're just trying to, there was one paper came in that really looked like it had been thrown together, and rather than just reject it, I intervened early to get back to them to say, look, do you want to work this again a little bit more? I'll give you another week, and try and put a bit more theory in it. It's got some promise. They came back and said, no, can do, I'm too busy. Fine, okay, well, what then the rejection doesn't hurt so much, right? So there's ways of doing it, I think. But yeah, I think it's something that we all have to, we shouldn't have to grin and bear it, but we certainly have to bear it in the minute.
Great, thanks. And there's some great responses too. I was just reading through the chat, sort of from both sides too. It's not easy being rejected, but it's also not easy rejecting, I guess, and it's a learning process all around. So yeah, I'll copy some of these questions, or if you want to add to the forum, we can maybe carry on some of these discussions, but now we're out of time. And yeah, I'd like to thank everybody, especially our 4 panel members, and yeah, thank you. I did the clapping thing.